what do you think provided the infrastructure for game-changing companies like Dropbox, Airbnb, and Netflix? And what was it that also ignited the revolution in the publishing industry, allowing anyone to self-publish? And what was it that created the possibility for hundreds of thousands of businesses to sell physical products to anyone from anywhere, whilst having all of their inventory housed and delivered on demand for them, without these business owners even needing to have their own physical locations? Well, the answer to all of those different things is Amazon. And more interestingly, the who behind Amazon, which is certainly the story of one man, Jeff Bezos, and the even more fascinating story for people like us who are into psychology and growth mindset, is the story and application of the mental models and principles for decision-making that we can all use in our own lives. You're probably aware that Jeff Bezos is in a regular toss-up for the world's richest man, along with Elon Musk and Bernard Arnault. And at the time of recording here in May 2024, it's Bernard Arnault. But if you're interested in who is the world's richest man, it does seem to bounce around month to month based on stock prices, at least for the past few years. Now, Jeff is synonymous with Amazon, of course, and e-commerce, which has certainly had an incredible impact on society, but we often forget about AWS that forged the path in cloud computing for companies to build and host applications on their servers, which paved the way for companies like Dropbox and Netflix and Reddit, and of course now the new wave of companies like OpenAI and ChatGPT. And there's a lot more fascinating things that we're going to find out in this episode. Despite Jeff Bezos not being open to lots of interviews or ever writing his own newsletter, it doesn't change the fact that he's built a set of incredible mental models and principles for success and decision-making. And these can be found in his shareholder letters, company meetings, and rare interviews. And it is very easy to dismiss him as the obnoxious dude that built the cheap everything story and exploits its workers. And I'm not here to change your mind on him, but I do think it would be silly to ignore the huge amount of inventions along the way that drove Amazon's success and the psychology behind it. History and biographies for me are one of the best tools to learn about life, and using the lens of psychology and mental models, I think we're going to have a ton of insights today. So hello and welcome to the episode on some more applied psychology today with me, Sam Webster. It's truly a banger, so stay tuned.
At Evernorth Health Services, we believe costs shouldn't get in the way of life-changing care, and we're doing everything in our power to make it possible. Behavioral health solutions that also keep your projections at their best? It's possible. Pharmacy benefits that benefit your bottom line? It's possible. Complex specialty care that cares about your ROI? It's possible. Because we're already doing it. All while saving businesses billions. That's Wonder made possible. Learn more at evernorth.com/wonder.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Whether you're selling a little or a lot, Shopify helps you do your thing, however you cha-ching. From the launch your online shop stage, all the way to the we just hit 1 million orders stage. No matter what stage you're in, Shopify's there to help you grow. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/special offer, all lowercase. That's shopify.com/special offer.
We have 11 powerful mental models to get through, along with a lot of stories to help demonstrate it all. So I'm going to try not to hang about. Jeff is famous for saying, we've had 3 big ideas at Amazon that we've stuck with for 18 years, and they're the reason we are successful. Put the customer first, invent, and be patient. And we're going to see how these 3 main themes play out over this episode. If you've looked into Jeff Bezos a little, you've probably heard that he was laser focused on Amazon being customer-centric, and he's also famous for the term day one thinking. But before we get into those, I want to talk about what is the most fundamental and critical mental model for me that drives everything behind their success. And this is called thinking in primitives. This philosophy involves breaking down complex systems into fundamental building blocks or primitives. These can be reused and recombined to serve various different purposes. And this is really evident in Amazon Web Services or AWS. It's a very complex IT infrastructure where there's lots of components, and it's provided as a simple standardized service that developers can use to build and scale applications. As nothing like this existed, Amazon had to build its own giant server infrastructure to power their own Amazon.com website. And Jeff realized it could be repurposed into a service for others to use. AWS was launched in 2006 with just the simple S3 simple online storage product. It allowed developers to store data online and access it. It was a very simple, pure building block. Quickly after that, they released EC2, which is their elastic compute cloud, and that allowed a developer to place an application that could run remotely in the servers and could interact with the stored data in different ways. That might not sound crazy exciting these days, but before then, if you wanted to run a business online, you had to manage your own server infrastructure in your house, garage, or office. And that was a massive blocker to innovation and people doing stuff. When Amazon provided these basic primitive building blocks, it sparked the revolution in tech startups. As I mentioned, Netflix, but also Pinterest, Slack, Dropbox, Lyft, I think I mentioned Reddit and Airbnb. All these companies were able to exist and build on Amazon's infrastructure. And Amazon released this 2 years before Google started trying to keep up, and 4 years before Microsoft released Microsoft Azure. And it's these services that are now allowing the AI revolution to happen. It was also this cloud service that allowed Amazon to build the WhisperSync infrastructure that meant that when they released the Kindle, they could get an ebook delivered to your device instantly. And it's these primitive building blocks that allowed the Amazon team to provide the essential core components that run in the background that you don't even notice, but they make the products that you want work. And outside of tech, I don't feel AWS is really spoken about enough. But it is almost 20% of Amazon's revenue and a whopping 70% of their operating income. So hopefully this has proven that being relentless on finding and building primitives for yourself can be hugely valuable. Even in Amazon's most recent shareholder letter this year, they talk about their focus on building products for builders. And one of the ways that they aim to be resilient is to quote, building in primitives so that we can innovate and experiment at the highest rate. Now, let's move on to perhaps Jeff's most famous philosophy, which is his customer-centric obsession. It has 3 different elements here. First is just general customer satisfaction. You can see this in Amazon's return process. Most of the time, if you don't want your product, you don't need to talk to anyone. You can just go into the Amazon website, click the return button, put your item back in the box, it gets picked up for you, your money is returned within hours. If there is some form of issue with it, you can talk to a representative quite easily, and they will do whatever they can to sort out your problem, and their number one goal is to try and make you feel satisfied. When Amazon first started doing this, it was so different to any other business, and it is still quite unusual. But the genius of it is that it keeps people coming back and trusting them. And having such good customer service means that your marketing can be done for you when people are so happy to recommend you. Jeff says that if you make customers unhappy in the physical world, they might each tell 6 friends, but if you make customers unhappy on the internet, they could each tell 6,000 people. The next part of customer obsession is ignoring competitors. Jeff says here that if you're competitor focused, you have to wait until there is a competitor doing something. Being customer focused allows you to be more pioneering and inventive. That's how they built AWS before anybody else, or launched a service like the Amazon Echo Dot with Alexa, just because it seemed like it could be a good idea even though there was no proven market for it. He says that if you're watching your competitors, you're just unlikely to invent a bunch of stuff on your own. Like, no one specifically asked for the Prime membership with the free delivery service, but that came from their 3rd customer principle, which is anticipating customers' needs and working backwards from them. Jeff Bezos and his team had noticed that the cost of shipping on checkout could really deter customers from completing a purchase. It went against their ethos of making things convenient and satisfying customers. If they're wasting their time looking to buy stuff and then just dropping out, it's not a good experience. And the idea for Prime actually came from a software engineer, Charlie Ward, who dropped the idea in an Amazon suggestion box. It was just a simple idea to provide a free 2-day delivery service, but it was amazingly complex to organize logistically, with a huge investment required to build out their own delivery network. Jeff thought about it for a while, and he pushed the idea for making a flat annual membership fee for customers, despite many of the executives in his team being against it. And it was really driven by his principle of just minimizing customer friction and focusing on long-term gains. Because when they looked at the data, it just looked like it wouldn't pay itself back in the next few years and be a giant financial loss. But Jeff went with it anyway. Prime was rolled out without a big announcement or anything, but it quickly led to a lot of improvements in customer satisfaction, so they rolled it out internationally. And sure, looking at this, it seems so obvious looking backwards, but I genuinely remember when Amazon suddenly went from being an online store where you could buy stuff to suddenly having this huge delivery network. And it genuinely seemed a bit like madness. Like, just imagine if Google decided to build FedEx. You'd be like, what are you doing? And that is kind of how it felt, but it worked so well in building their long-term business and the flywheel of growth. To quote Jeff himself, "We innovate by starting with the customer and working backwards. That becomes the touchstone of how we invent." Next, we have a concept that's already come up a little bit, and that is long-term thinking. Jeff has never tried to maximize profits in a given year for shareholders, and he always tries to think about investing now for impact in 7 to 10 years' time. He has several great quotes here, but I'll go with two. "If you're long-term oriented, customer interests and shareholder interests are aligned, and we are comfortable planting seeds and waiting for them to grow into trees." And I think this philosophy is really obvious when you look at the ethos of Amazon and the way they've invested in projects like AWS, Prime, or of course the Kindle. It was a device that no customer asked them for. It required significant investment in the short term to build out the primitives that allowed for the long-term creation of the e-publishing industry and the ability to please customers with a library in their pocket. Now, I personally quite like having physical books when I can, but when I started traveling in 2008 as an 18-year-old, I permanently had 3 to 7 physical books on me, and instead, having a tiny device where I can read anything is a game changer. And it is, of course, an interesting story here about how it came to be. In 2004, Jeff Bezos did want to grow their position in the publishing industry. They began as a bookstore after all. He asked Steve Kessel to manage the Kindle team. Jeff had realized that e-reading could be a thing in the same way that he'd had a hunch on e-commerce and pursued it with the Amazon store. So he pursued e-reading in a big way. He gave Steve a single overarching directive. He said, "I want you to proceed as if your goal is to put everyone selling physical books out of a job." And with this singular obvious goal, he then set up an entire new department in a separate building to maintain confidentiality. And then it took a while. There was a lot of challenges with the e-ink display so that it could be comfortable to read for extended periods. And the other big hurdle was allowing readers to download and read the book within 60 seconds. And Bezos was fixated on this feature due to their customer obsession. And that's why they developed WhisperNet Sync, which of course was leveraging their previous investments in primitives from AWS. It took 3 years from idea to launching in 2007, but within 3 years, ebook sales overtook physical book sales, and it truly changed the publishing industry. It spawned the e-publishing industry, allowing anyone to self-publish easily, where the authors could keep 70% of their book sale income, giving 30% to Amazon, of course, but compared to an author only keeping 15 to 20% from traditional publishing, still kind of nice. And it's generally regarded that overall, reading has increased worldwide because of e-readers, due to the big increase in accessibility and affordability, and of course the ability to use different fonts and sizes that aid readers with vision problems, or like my mum reads loads, but her wrists hurt now, but with a Kindle, she can still read as much as she likes. And the great thing about this story is it really highlights their obsession on long-term projects because it was a long-term investment. And Jeff says that we want to make money when people use our devices, not when they buy our devices. And this really highlights the focus on the infrastructure that the Kindle provided that gave them the long-term benefit over releasing a product that they wanted just for direct income. He didn't want to build a product that he could sell and make money off of people buying it. He wanted to build a membership into buying products off Amazon. And for Amazon, A Kindle purchase isn't the key moment that drives their revenue. It's the membership into buying ebooks off of Amazon that they care about. And another part of long-term thinking is the willingness to be misunderstood. Innovation and pioneering work can often be misunderstood for very extended periods of time. Jeff really stresses the importance of just being patient and steadfast in the face of criticism and people misunderstanding you. Because if you're confident in your vision and strategy, you should just ignore other people, ignore social pressure, and do your thing. He says that the thing about inventing is you have to be both stubborn and flexible. The hard part is figuring out when to be which. And that is, of course, very true. At this point, I think it would be good to start talking about some of their team dynamics and principles. As we've heard just now in the story of the Kindle, Jeff appointed a single executive to manage the project and make it happen. And they have a model called single-threaded leadership. This model involves dedicating a leader with a team to focus entirely on a single significant initiative. This ensures undivided attention and resources can be directed to critical projects without individuals trying to juggle multiple priorities. Because imagine you had a head of innovation and they're trying to juggle AWS and Prime and Kindle at the same time. It would be a nightmare. And so having a single-threaded leadership by project, it really encourages the best execution and innovation. And this focus also ties into a quote from Jeff of maintain a firm grasp of the obvious at all times. When you have a single leader with a singular goal, like Jeff giving Steve Kessel the order of put everyone in the physical publishing industry out of business, it helps ensure that one person has one obvious task and nothing gets clouded with multiple priorities. Going further into team, in the same way that Amazon invests in building primitive building blocks, they think of their employees as builders. They focus on hiring people who can be resourceful, and Jeff even thinks this way in his personal life. When asked how he went about finding a wife, he said, "I wanted a woman who could get me out of a third world prison. Life is too short to hang out with people who aren't resourceful." And that seems kind of ridiculous, but it is his principle. And I have to say, I spent a lot of time in the tech startup industry and have some friends who work in Amazon head offices in AWS. And Amazon hires a lot of previous tech founders who prove they can build stuff because Amazon really wants people that aren't afraid to disrupt things and can think about what they would personally need as a founder and then build products that they would use themselves. And Jeff also says that people who are right most of the time are people who change their minds often. And he's really happy to make mistakes and hire people that accept that making mistakes is part of the path to success. I am delighted to recommend my sponsor, Cozy Earth, whose bedding and loungewear I genuinely love. It's made from high quality viscose from bamboo, and it gets softer with every wash. It was voted as Oprah's favorite things several years in a row, and it's because their bed sheets are so damn incredible. Their collection also includes some divine loungewear for your home or travel. They have cute little tote bags to carry your gear anywhere. So whether you are exploring through a journey of personal growth or discovering new parts of the world, you can nestle up under starry skies with the softness of Cozy Earth's loungewear. So pack your bags, venture on and visit cozyearth.com today and use code GROWTH at checkout for an exclusive 35% off. And let Cozy Earth be your travel companion on the road to adventurous growth. cozyearth.com and use code GROWTH at checkout. Another really interesting thing I found here is Amazon's expectations around meetings. Instead of having a meeting to discuss an idea with maybe a few slides where people get informed about something and then everybody makes some notes afterwards, and it'll be followed up by some different tasks and future meetings to work out eventually what the decision will be. Amazon really flips this on its head. The person presenting the meeting has to put a lot more work in beforehand. They'll build out a document of everything you need to know on this subject, and it'll be distributed before the meeting. Attendees are expected to read this before they arrive at the meeting. They have the meeting where everybody already has the information completely processed, and the meeting merely has the key goal of answering a business question or making a specific decision, without the whole dead weight of dragging tasks afterwards and waiting on each other. And I thought this was a brilliant way of keeping focus on the obvious thing of just making decisions so you can move fast. And this meeting etiquette really drives into his concept of high velocity decision making. The goal of this model is to move fast and avoid becoming stagnant. Bezos says that you should make decisions with 70% of the information that you wish you had. And he distinguishes clearly between two types of decisions. Type 1 are consequential and irreversible decisions where impact could last for a long time. In life, things like the university you go to or who you marry could be like this. In business, a type 1 decision would be something like the Amazon Prime service, which required a massive amount of infrastructure and investment to pull off that they would never get back if it flopped. And there were plenty of spreadsheets saying it was a bad idea and could kill them. But Bezos put a lot of thought into it and he just had a massive hunch and was like, this is a risk that's worth taking. But he didn't take that decision lightly. Type 2 decisions are the opposite. They are quickly reversible. Jeff suggests that actually most decisions are type 2, where speed is much more crucial. This would be something like offering a new pricing scheme, perhaps a brand update, or just a new smaller service offer. You can try it, and if it isn't a success, the door is still open to reverse it. Sure, it might not be completely easy, but you'll have learned something along the way. A few months ago on my podcast, I launched a new branding, and it was a total flop. I thought it looked great, it was much more modern, I was happy with it, but reflecting on it, the overall vibe was a bit of like a darker, male-orientated mindset bro that is not my vibe. It is not actually my brand. I am about psychology, curiosity. I have slightly more female listeners than male. I'm never going to be lecturing anyone, just sort your mindset out and work harder, hustle harder. And I've listened to a few other mindset podcasts, and a lot of them are full of talking down to people like they're just being dumb, not doing the right thing. Whereas I really prefer the approach of digging into the real psychology of why different problems exist, like depression or catastrophizing, for natural reasons that make sense, and what it is that we might do about them, and tell you some fun stories along the way to keep it interesting. Anyway, I reversed my branding fail and learned about what it is I really need to focus on for my brand and where I'm going with it. So overall, it was still a win in the long term despite the short-term fail and the loss of a few listeners and exposure, but I'm much more in touch with what I need to do to build for the long term. On a related strand to the concept of high velocity decision making is the regret minimization, which is a tool you should also use when making a decision. And this has two great parts to it. Firstly, if you follow the philosophy of regret minimization, I feel there is a direct impact of just relief and general satisfaction when you follow the process of projecting yourself into the future, look back on your current life to evaluate which decision would minimize your regrets. And for Jeff, he said this process really helped him decide to start Amazon instead of pursuing a stable and lucrative career in finance, because he wanted to do the risky bet of running a startup. And ultimately, if it had failed after 3 or 4 years, he could have still gone back to that career. And he said, I knew that if I failed, I wouldn't regret that, but I knew the one thing that I might regret is not trying. And you can see this in Amazon, where it drives a lot of their decisions to try risky, exciting things that might fail for the sake of being inventive rather than stagnant. But the other part of regret minimization is the self-talk. Let's say you do make a bad decision and it doesn't pay off. It's easy to tell yourself that you are stupid, but if you record the facts when you're making the decision, and with that information that you have to make the choice, you really think forwards and backwards and decide, with the knowledge you have and the statistics of what you think will work, what will give you the overall least regrets. You don't need to beat yourself up afterwards just because it didn't work, because you made the right decision, and some of your right decisions are still going to end badly, and that's fine. And I think this is also great for teams because it's so easy to fall in general bitching about things when something goes wrong because if you had an idea that people didn't pursue. And in the culture of Amazon, they actually have a policy called disagree and commit. So let's say you attended a meeting where everyone says their part and there's a consensus on a decision that you didn't want. It doesn't help you if you now sit around regretting the project even happening and not going the way you wanted it to. Perhaps you even undermine it slightly by reminding people that you always thought something else might be better. Instead, You have to accept your place, and that the best thing now is to just put your all behind it and commit to the idea to make it a success or prove that it was a bad idea with a fair test of its strength in the public, rather than due to any failure happening because of the team members' lack of commitment. And I think that's one of those things that's really noticeable in culture, when there's lots of people within a company that are actually talking bad things about the company, or other employees being like, oh, this is such a stupid decision, we shouldn't be doing this. So you're basically implying that your company is stupid. And should you be in a stupid company? No. Of course, things don't go our way, but we don't need to be a baby about it. And in fact, Amazon, of course, has the culture of embracing failure. And you'll have noticed that I've mentioned the acceptance of failure a bit already. So it makes sense to actually dive further into the fact that Amazon has a lot of failures. Jeff says that failure and invention are inseparable twins. To invent, you have to experiment. And if you know in advance that something is going to work, it's not actually an experiment. He says that if you decide that you're going to do only the things that you know are going to work, you're just going to leave a lot of opportunity on the table. Instead, if you double the number of experiments that you do per year, you're going to double your level of inventiveness. So to go through some of their spectacular failures, in 2010, Amazon began working on the Fire Phone, and after 4 whole years of investment with a big team, it was launched. It had a few unique features like Firefly for scanning items and telling you about them. At the time, that was kind of innovative, not anymore. But anyway, a year after it was released, launch sales were terrible. And so in 2015, they had to close it off and write it off as an almost $200 million loss, where they totally failed to enter the smartphone market. Another project that launched to the public in 2014 was Amazon Wallet for storing gift cards. That was a complete flop, and you probably never heard of it. Also in the same year was the enticingly named Amazon Local Register. That was a physical payment process allowing businesses to use their mobile phones to swipe credit cards. The idea was to compete with services like Square, and adoption was very slow for them, and there was a lot of heavy competition in the market already against them, and they had to abandon the project. A year later in 2015, they launched Amazon Destinations for booking hotels, and that was supposed to compete with other booking sites. It didn't catch on at all and was shut down in the same year. Also in 2015, they launched Amazon Restaurants. This service allowed customers to order meals from local restaurants through Amazon's website and mobile app. They even expanded it to several US cities, but it never managed to get adoption versus competitors like Uber Eats, Grubhub, Deliveroo. So they canned it. And the fun fact here was that my first business in 2009 was a bicycle delivery company in Bristol, and we had a lot of businesses that wanted us to deliver takeaways for local restaurants, so it was a service we added. It grew so well that I even tried to convince Nando's and McDonald's that we should do delivery for them, and they laughed at me like I was absolutely crazy, willingness to be misunderstood, that people don't get inventions and catch on. And sadly, I kind of took that as something that I couldn't scale. I built the company whilst I was studying my university degree, and I sold it after I left in 2013 because I had no idea how to raise funding to try and grow it or invest in tech, and really no idea about anything because I was 23. Anyway, back to Amazon. Besides the fact that talking about their failures makes the point that failure is a part of innovation, it also shows us that there is some serendipity in discovery when it comes to things like the importance of timing and ignoring competition. Timing-wise, all of these products that failed were kind of late to the market, perhaps best highlighted by the fact that 21-year-old me, who was a student and didn't know how to run a business, somehow managed to launch a business in 2009 that grew whilst I made every single mistake possible. It's insane that the business still carried on. I had no technology, no infrastructure besides a mobile phone and a spreadsheet and a few bikes, and I had no investment. But I still even managed to sell the business. Sure, I left tons of money on the table compared to what it could have been, and I might have been a little bit early considering the fact that no big restaurants thought it was worth taking it seriously, but Amazon turned up 6 years later, late to the party, and they couldn't even compete despite having all the tech, all the infrastructure, all the capital investment necessary. And just looking at all of those failures, you can see that they were launching into matured markets with a new competing product rather than innovating on building the market. And perhaps one of the big weaknesses of Amazon is it seems that they have quite an inability to copy stuff that is established. Like looking at it, I feel like their Prime Video service that competes with Netflix is about the only one that's taken off well, that launched into like a very mature market. I'm happy to be wrong on this. Sure, there was an e-reader before Kindle, but it wasn't a mature market. Amazon built the market. Whereas if you look at other companies, Google was able to launch Android to rival with the Apple App Store, and they launched the Google Pixel phone with enough success to keep it going compared to the iPhone, and Google built Google Cloud to rival AWS. Sure, Google has had some failures like their Circles thing, trying to be a new social media somewhere between LinkedIn and Facebook. But anyway, Amazon's history of copying is not pretty, yet they have been wildly successful overall by just testing things, and it's summed up well by the quote that what's dangerous is not to evolve, not to invent, and not to improve the customer experience. I mentioned at the start that Jeff is famous for the concept of day one thinking, and it's a mindset that he talks about in every shareholder letter he's ever written, and it's really driven deep into the core of Amazon. It's about maintaining the practices and attitudes of a startup, agility, responsiveness, and a constant sense of urgency. He believes that in business, it's always day one, and day two is the stasis, followed by irrelevance, followed by excruciating, painful decline, followed by death. This mentality helps Amazon stay nimble and innovative despite its size. And he has a lot of great quotes here. He says, all businesses need to be young forever. If your customer base ages with you, you just turn into Woolworths. And then, the death knell for any enterprise is to glorify the past, no matter how good it was. And perhaps most interesting is the quote that it's very difficult to get people to focus on the most important things when you're in boom times. And I think this is important because even when the going is good, you have to put a lot more effort into thinking like a startup, and you test and experiment with a mindset of being resourceful and not lazy. And it's this attitude that's really helped Amazon stay a high growth business, always focused on the long term. And that's why they don't pay a dividend, and they don't relax and just maximize profits with what they've currently got. And they always look to build new infrastructure, new primitives, test new ideas that might fail. Right now in 2024, Amazon is trialing drone delivery in the air, on streets. They're trialing Amazon Go, which are local places where you can walk in and pick up your stuff and go. They are investing heavily in robotics across their warehouses and for last mile delivery, which can help reduce their costs by a lot and increase delivery speeds. Thinking about the customer. They've been launching and growing Amazon Care, which is their arm going into healthcare. Since they purchased PillPack and started fulfilling subscriptions, they now also offer home visits and telehealth calls. And of course, like all of the big tech companies these days, they're investing heavily in AI, and have even started building their own types of processors to rival NVIDIA. And then there's Project Coupier, which is aiming to build a mesh of satellites orbiting the Earth to provide wireless internet from the sky, a service that competes with Starlink. And considering the failure of other attempts at competition, it'll be really interesting to see what happens there. But as Jeff ends every shareholder letter, it is still very much day one at Amazon. And now to bring all these things together, there's a few loose ends I want to tie up to put a nice bow in everything. Bezos often describes Amazon's growth using the flywheel effect, where an initial effort to get the flywheel moving, such as lowering prices to increase customer visits, will lead to a series of events that build upon each other. And this will drive the company's performance and increase momentum. You can see this in the way they invest in building primitives and maintain the long-term outlook and keep trying risky things with a mindset that their decisions are reversible. Another thing they focus on is word of mouth marketing and brand. He says that your brand is what other people say about you when you're not in the room. And this is why he's so obsessed with a great customer experience and making things like the returns process as easy as possible. He says in the old world, you devoted 30% of your time to building a great service and 70% of the time to shouting about it. But in the new world, that inverts. And this is something you'll see from both Amazon and Tesla, is they do so little marketing because their products market themselves. Every YouTuber was lining up to review the Tesla Cybertruck for free, getting millions of eyeballs on Tesla when every other automaker has to pay millions of money to get their advert on TV so that you can look at them. And that's like the best example of word of mouth marketing ever. Another thing that stuck out for me reading into this was some of Jeff's seemingly opposing beliefs. Now, as we've heard, he firmly states that you should ignore competition. And we also saw how when they often built projects that were competing products, they failed. But I didn't talk that much about his reputation for being a bit of a psycho when it came to crushing competition for any of his businesses. He's often used pricing warfare to price smaller players out of the market, often just a small business operating a small company offering a few products on their Amazon store, but Amazon would come in and undercut them if they saw the demand. He's also had several conflicts with book publishers over pricing and leveraged his own monopoly on the publishing market to make his own terms with them. This is something you also may have seen with their Audible pricing strategy. Amazon has often acquired companies to build speed going into new domains against other rivals. And this is a common practice that lots of companies do. And Amazon is one of the biggest people at doing it. In fact, they really jump on the opportunity to acquire competing businesses for the sake of moving fast. They acquired Goodreads and a few of Goodreads' competitors to help them gain a corner on the publishing market. They acquired IMBD and a few competitors there to help them build more data around the customer profile of what to sell them, to help them cornerstone the DVD market, and they became one of their primitives that helped them with their Prime Video service. Most recently, they acquired a stake in Anthropic to build the ChatGPT competitor, Claude AI. So for someone who says, don't look at your competitors, he also does the opposite thing of doing a lot of looking at their competitors or buying their competitors. This doesn't mean he's an idiot, by the way. In fact, part of Steve Jobs' brilliance was his ability to have very expansive, broad picture ideas, yet also be minutely focused and obsessed on the details. I'm actually working on an episode right now on some of the most impactful combinations of opposing traits that if you can hold them within yourself, it can really help build success. Another one of these opposing trait combinations that Jeff has is his stubbornness and flexibility. As I said earlier, Jeff believes that for innovation, you have to both be stubborn and flexible at the same time, and at other times know when to be which. He certainly also said that you need to be stubborn on vision and flexible on details as a company in general. And I also think their concept of disagreeing and committing shows that you have to be flexible on outcomes not going your way, but stubborn in your commitments. And I actually think this duality is really powerful, which is why I'm going to do a whole episode on it. And then, of course, I couldn't get through this episode without mentioning growth mindset, just in case you thought I was about to end. But this really ties together better than you might even expect. Some of the frameworks that we've mentioned are, of course, very obviously related to growth mindset in terms of the capacity for embracing failure as part of innovation and, of course, day one thinking, staying young and inventive. But other parts of these mental models seem less obvious but are very related to growth mindset. High velocity decision making, for example, allows you to do twice as many experiments, to be twice as innovative. And that's a massive boost to your rate of growth, as well as embracing the difference between irreversible and reversible decisions so that you can make more experiments and deliberately accept that they're going to fail. Now, let's say a musician might think they have a growth mindset because they practice new, harder and harder techniques for 4 hours a day and they're always pushing themselves musically, sure. But if they play it safe in other areas of their music career, like play mostly with the same musicians in the same city, maybe they don't change the branding of their band very often, or perhaps they wait to make decisions on investments, that's imposing a lot of limitations on their growth and isn't really growth mindset thinking or moving fast. And then there's primitive building blocks in terms of growth thinking for your own success. Sure, of course, you might not be able to build server farms or launch an entire logistics company, but for personal primitives, you can think a little bit differently here. I think about building blocks like the concept of building a second brain or just having an organized note-taking system or the way that you manage your week-to-week and your month-to-month over the year. Do you maintain a network of people that inspire you and have skills that could help you succeed in your next project? Whether that's a network of investors if you're an entrepreneur or a network of publishers if you're an author. Do you spend time making any content or have an audience that you can leverage or Do you understand the skills that you need to perform at your best, like the basics of coding and SEO if you're a marketer? On this podcast, for example, I'm doing one episode a week that breaks down a fundamental primitive of how the mind works to help people put the building blocks together of how your mind works and how to use your mind better, because your mind is the most basic primitive that you have. Another element of growth mindset here is, of course, the value of just doing things and regret minimization. Jeff could have had a secure job and made savings before he started an idea, but he just wanted to do stuff. Or the example of me, I am certainly not a better entrepreneur than Jeff Bezos in the slightest, yet my first business worked because I was in the right place at the right time, and people found me that needed something doing that I could offer. And if you start doing something, you might get lucky like me, or you might not, but you'll learn a lot. And starting a business or a project is something that is a reversible decision with minimal loss. So you could start an Etsy store or a newsletter. You could start a drop shipping business or start a podcast. You can do it all in your spare time and you can learn. And sure, of course, you don't have to hustle. You don't have to start a business. If you want to hang out with more people, you could just start hosting more themed dinner parties, or you could start a meetup group on something you're interested in. You could organize a road trip across Italy. Like something you're interested in, just go and do it, you know? And so perhaps the best place to wrap everything up is the saying that when the world changes around you and when it changes against you, what used to be a tailwind is now a headwind. You have to lean into that and figure out what to do, because complaining isn't a strategy. So don't bitch about things, don't regret things, work out what to do next with 70% of the information you need and just do stuff. And definitely don't complain. And yes, if you didn't like this episode, also don't complain. And in fact, to get a little bit meta here, this episode was one of my own experiments to do a semi-biographical episode for once to see what people think of it and if it adds value to you. Personally, for me, I really enjoyed researching this and feel excited to do more similar episodes. You may have been noticing lately that I've been approaching the podcast from a bottom-up lens of pure psychology and physiology of the brain, behavior, and then a more top-down applied psychology approach of looking at our behaviors and things that we want to do and working down from what are the causes and the sort of mental model systems approaches or like psychology of our different mindsets that we can use to get to those behaviors. And so the episode today I thought would be worth having for some more general mental model ideas, and hopefully didn't come across too much like a mindset bro. And I'd at least like to think that I'm hitting a nice balance between these top-down and bottom-up approaches. And I'm really, really grateful for any feedback on these tests that I'm doing, because I, of course, have an audience obsession and I want to make sure that you're happy and getting the maximum value. So feel free to shoot me an email at growthmindsetpodcast@gmail.com, or just leave a comment or rating on your preferred app. Remember, life is too short to regret your decisions, so make sure you're subscribed to the podcast and don't miss my future episode on seemingly opposing personality traits that are actually epic combinations for success, or my current series that's going on cognitive biases, because that one's honestly amazing. And the last episode I did was on pricing strategies and general manipulation of buying behaviors, of why we spend money on the things we spend on. And it even involves a few examples of tactics that Amazon uses. And on that, I have talked far too much, so be kind to yourself, go climb some trees, and don't forget to smile at strangers.
Hi, I'm Jessica Porter, and I'm a hypnotherapist, as well as a total relaxation nerd. If you're struggling to sleep at night, I'm here to help. Sleep Magic is my new podcast of relaxing hypnosis, created to help you doze off tonight. With my episodes every Wednesday, I'm going to make suggestions that help you relax really, really deeply. And hypnosis is not what you've seen on TV. There's no swinging pocket watch or clucking like a chicken. I promise. I'm just here to help you make friends with sleep again, so you can get the rest you deserve. So search Sleep Magic on your favorite podcast app, and I'll see you there.